Your body comes from God's loving design for you and the image of God that you uniquely bear.
Hey friend, you are listening to The Discerning Mother. This is for the woman of faith who wants to feel calm, grounded, and whole again without pretending that everything is fine. In these episodes, you will learn to understand your body, your nervous system, and the stories that you carry so you can become the woman that God had in mind. All right, let's dive in. All right, welcome back to the Discerning Mother podcast. So excited to be here today with Christina. Christina, do you want to go ahead and give a little bit of info about yourself, where you live, your family, everything like that?
Sure. Thanks, Brigid. Yeah, my name is Christina Valenzuela, and I run a business called Pearl and Thistle, where we offer lifelong body literacy to Catholics of all ages and stages, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but basically what it means is that I provide menstrual cycle and fertility education for Catholics along the whole spectrum of our lives. And so I have programs that teach girls about menstrual cycles for the first time in my first period prep course called Cycle Prep. And then I have charting programs for teens and young adults. I offer natural family planning services for couples. And then I also have ongoing resources for parishes because I think this is such an important topic. So that's what I do for my work, but I am a mom. I have 4 kids. We live outside of Boston. My husband works in robotics, which is super fun. And I'm also a life professed member of the lay fraternities of St. Dominic. So I've been a lay Dominican, for many, many years now. But that's also a part of my journey and my motherhood as well.
That's so cool. I want to hear more about that lay Dominican because I did not know that about you. So yeah, can you share a little bit more about that? Like how it affects your life, how you got into it, lifestyle, all that sort of thing?
Gosh.
So interesting. Because I know, I know a lot about the Franciscan Third Order, but I don't necessarily know too much about Dominican. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, so for anybody who's listening who may not be familiar with what used to be called the Third Orders, these are basically lay people who profess religious life according to the rule of St. Francis or St. Dominic as appropriate to the religious order that they belong to. And so we as lay Dominicans, we live a modified Dominican rule of life, meaning we have certain prayer and community and study and preaching obligations as lay people. And so we participate in the mission of the Order of Preachers. How I got into that is a little bit of a long story, but basically I've known that I've had a Dominican charism for a very long time. And so part of that exploration was figuring out that I was not called to life as a religious sister, and then realizing later on in marriage that that was what I was being called to support my primary vocation as a wife and as a mother. It can be tricky to kind of fit in all of the requirements, so to speak, all of the things that I am supposed to do to fulfill that rule, but always keeping in mind that this is ultimately designed for not just my holiness, but the holiness of my family as I lead my family as well and participate in the preaching mission of like bringing up my children. So yeah, so that's basically the lay Dominicans. I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but that's kind of a general intro for anybody who isn't familiar.
It brought me to thinking about Mother Teresa, about her call within a call. And it's like,
yes,
I feel like that's exactly what it is, where you have your call, your calling of your primary vocation of marriage, then you have the secondary calling that supports your primary vocation. It doesn't take away from it, it supports it.
That's right. That's right.
And yeah, it's just so beautiful. And so I'm sure you're seeing the fruits now, but like you're also probably going to see the fruits in your children and in everybody that you're preaching to. Do you find that your courses and like what it is that you're teaching women and men is like part of your preaching vocation there?
Well, I think absolutely it is. Yeah. I mean, there's Dominicans, part of our spirituality, you'll notice that a lot of Dominicans are involved in education in all sorts of different forms, right? And so I think that there's definitely that tendency to see where study and preaching go hand in hand, right? That by learning to study the things of this world and to contemplate them in light of the belief of our faith that this is all created by God and meant to be known and loved, that we like hand that on to other people through knowledge. So that's definitely a key factor in a lot of what I do for my work. And then besides that, I mean, it's also just something that kind of wells up inside of me. I like to talk, right? I like to talk. I like to give lessons. So often around the dinner table, we'll be talking. My kids will ask me and we'll go through something that I like to call a homily. So we'll break down the readings for the week. And do a little exploration there and all those other things. So I would say, yes, for sure, my work is an extension of that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, and so tell us more about your work with Pearl and Thistle. Like, what does the name mean? How did you get there? Yeah, tell us the journey.
Yeah, so the name came kind of late. I became certified as a natural family planning instructor, I think when my second baby was about 1 year old. It was the result of me really having a hard time finding somebody to help me postpartum. And I thought, wow, if somebody as motivated as myself has a hard time connecting with an instructor, we must just need a lot more instructors out there. And so I started that work, I think, in 2013. And I was still working in an official capacity in the church at that point. I was doing youth ministry, confirmation preparation, and all that kind of stuff. But eventually I left that work as my family got bigger. And in 2018, I decided to kind of start my own business. The idea was to be a home for my natural family planning services. And then also family workshops or speaking engagements or whatever I felt inclined to do, because I'd been doing retreats and things for a while. But what came out of that really was this understanding that Pearl and Thistle, this new business, was supposed to be a path that was specifically focused on what I like to call body literacy, learning to read the signs of our body, and really introducing Catholics to this rich language of the body throughout our whole lives. So very rooted in theology of the body, very much rooted in science and anatomy and biology and all of that. So the name Pearl and Thistle actually is from my ancestors. So my great-great-great-great-grandmother is Saint Margaret of Scotland, who was known as the Pearl of Scotland.
So cool.
And the thistle is the Scottish royal symbol. And so it represents Margaret and Malcolm of Scotland, who Margaret is also part of my religious name in the Dominican order. So there's kind of like a tie in there.
Very cool. Okay, and so is this the same like Queen Margaret of Scotland? Because my daughter's actually going for Halloween and All Saints as Queen Margaret of Scotland. So that's so cool. I'll have to tell her that.
Well, there you go.
Her, I guess, heiress, if you want to say. That's so funny.
Oh, I guess not an heiress, no. But yeah, I think she's my 27th great-grandmother. I have to count the...
Well, I guess like kind of long lost heiress or something.
Right. Right. There we go.
That's so funny. I'm going to have to tell her that. All right. And I love what you said about the church and science, because again, I feel like a lot of times people think that like the church has all these rules and that the rules are like not really science-based. And that could not be further from the truth, because there is so much science. There's so much understanding of the feminine body, of fertility as a couple. There's so much of that. And I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention, because again, the church is not just making these willy-nilly rules. Like, it really is using our physiology. It's using all of the science that we know up until this point to really help to make, I don't want to say declarations, maybe you have the right word, that are going to help bring us to heaven. And again, that's like so important to understand that these things are not like, all of these quote rules are not in place to be a burden. They're really there to help bring us towards sanctification. So again, I just wanted to really spotlight that you said that, because I think that that's so important that women and men recognize that. Okay, cool. And so, yeah, you have books, you have courses. What is, I guess, if a woman who's listening to this is thinking like, what is natural family planning? How do I even get started? How do I know which method is for me? Which method do you teach? Yeah, can you go into all of that? I'd love to hear your side of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I teach a method that's a very small method. It's called Boston Crosscheck. It's a symptothermal hormonal method, meaning that we use 3 primary indicators for tracking ovulation in a cycle. So we teach all of our clients how to work with cervical fluid, hormone monitoring, and also temperature tracking. You don't have to use all 3 of them, but that's what everybody learns. As I said, Boston Crosscheck is a very small method. We originally were in-house with the Archdiocese of Boston until that office closed a number of years ago. And so now it's a privately owned method. But so how does somebody learn about natural family planning? There are a lot of great resources online in general. One very quick and easy resource to kind of do method comparisons is a website that some of my friends, Emily and Mary, run. It's called FamBase. It's FABMBASE.org. And they offer a lot of overview of different methods. And they have featured kind of interviews with instructors across different methods about like, well, how does this method work for people in this situation? Or who do you recommend it for? What are the basics? And so that's a wonderful resource. I do have a book. It's called The Language of Your Body, Embracing God's Design for Your Cycle. It was published by OSV in 2024. And this book gives a big overview, not just of kind of options for NFP. So there's a small section at the back, which kind of gives you an overview of the different method options, but really gives you a deep dive into understanding the science behind not just NFP, but cycle tracking in general, and understanding how our cycles are vital parts of our health, and kind of giving you an idea of why this might be important in the lives, not just of Catholic women, but something important for us to be teaching to our daughters about their bodies, or to our young men so that they understand women better, or more generally as a parish, as a church, so that we have a better appreciation for who woman was made to be, distinct from man. So it's all kind of rooted in the biology of that as a fundamental biological difference between men and women.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm so glad that you brought up your book, because I did want to definitely touch on that. And so first off, Boston Crosscheck is a great method. I personally have never used it, but I know people who have and they love it.
Well, it's great. Good. Yeah.
And again, I know it's smaller, but if anybody's like, they've tried all the things and it's just not working, maybe check out Boston Crosscheck. I am a Billings instructor, so like I love Billings, but I know that there's so many different methods and they all work for so many different women. It just really depends on like what it works best for you and like the season of life that you're in right now and what you're.
That's right. That's okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's go to your book. So I know you have many books, right? But I'd love to hear about this book that was published last year by OSV. Can you tell us a little bit about it? How is this Language of Your Body different? Who is it for? Like, who should be reading it? Give us all the information, all the juicy.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So The Language of Your Body is really my attempt to give a robust synthesis between the current science that we have about women's menstrual cycles and the wisdom of our tradition that has guided us in thinking about the importance of keeping the natural rhythms of our body intact through natural family planning, but also more wisdom about just really understanding the human body as a way that we uniquely image God as creatures, right? So we want to make sure that the theology that we have surrounding women is not completely separate from the biological information that we have about women, right? Our theology of women needs to be rooted in biology. And this was a big, big emphasis in JP2's writings, especially you think about Mulieris Dignitatem. He talks about the importance of understanding the biophysiological processes of pregnancy so that we can better understand Mary and her womanhood. And I think that's a really important point, is that our church's exposition on women should be rooted in the science of woman. So what this book really tries to do is to present the first half is kind of a theological exploration of how we can understand woman in this particular function of our body. Not saying that women are summed up by our menstrual cycles. Far from it, but just saying that this is an aspect of our biology that makes us unique and it bears contemplation and consideration. And then the second half of the book really takes a step back and gets a little bit practical and says, okay, well, if we really take seriously all of this information that we have from science and then also theological reflection about women, what should we be doing with it? And so it talks about learning to chart your cycle. It talks about the ways that women can begin adding this cycle knowledge to our kind of self-knowledge, to our relationship with God, to our relationships with others. It talks about how men and women can grow together in marriage through understanding this information together. And then it puts forward a vision for education in the church that I think would really benefit families in this kind of turbulent time when there's a lot of, maybe we can say, confusion in society at large about what it means for women to be different from men and how to instill that sense of goodness and dignity and worth through this particular education to our daughters and also to ourselves.
For sure. I love all of that. And you brought up JP too, so I'm going to ask you to elaborate because there's so much goodness there that we can get into. Okay, so for those who might not be familiar with St. John Paul II's teachings, I'll just leave it at that. Why is what he was advocating and teaching so important? And how has it changed the culture around a woman's body and her fertility in the church, and then maybe potentially outside of the church too? I'd love for you just to expand upon that.
Boy, that's like a dissertation topic.
I know.
So let me just, couple highlights. So JP2, one thing that it's important to remember is that JP2 was first and foremost a philosopher. He did his graduate work in philosophy, and obviously there was theology involved in that, but he was really concerned about making sure that modern philosophy did not lose sight of the importance of the individual and the relationships between persons. He wanted to make sure that philosophy was ultimately about persons and not ideas. And so what comes out of a lot of his work is he revives something in the Catholic intellectual tradition through his theology of the body, which is a series of Wednesday audiences that he gave over a number of years. He basically revives something in the Catholic tradition that I think was taken for granted in many centuries prior, which is the concept of the body as a sign or a small s sacrament, right? The body is a visible sign of the invisible spirit of the person, that a person is body and soul together. A person is not their mind. A person is not their soul. A person is this composite being. And so when we speak about the human person, we absolutely need to take into account what the body is positioned to tell us about who we are in relationship with God, but also with other people. And so he calls this the language of the body, okay, what God has written into our bodies as a mode of communication. And so that really is the foundation for his theology of the body, is this concept that the body is a visible sacrament that speaks a language that is meant to be read and communicated. From there, we get a whole lot of stuff. So theology of the body very much was his sort of expansion of Humanae Vitae and the implications that Paul VI had written about in Humanae Vitae. But then it also is very, very present in a lot of his other work. So I mentioned Mulieris Dignitatem already, in which he talks about the church's understanding of woman and Mary specifically as an archetype of woman. And so in that, he has a whole section about understanding women's biology, and that, you know, in order to better appreciate this idea or this archetype of woman, we have to actually understand the biological processes that her body underwent during pregnancy, right? That we can't forget about that, because she was a real woman who really underwent all of these changes and these experiences in pregnancy, and that should have some bearing on our conversation when we talk about. So that is a very, very big, sweeping, grossly simplified introduction to why this is important for our modern era. Yes. Just because I think that bringing it back to the body, reminding us that, you know, of our embodied nature, right? And making sure that we focus on the body as a means of God's communication to us. That's not a message really that the 20th century was generally putting forward for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I'm very grateful for him for taking the time to do that. And even at the end of his catecheses, he has this sort of phrase where he says, you know, and the implications for all of this could be vast. So he gives, at the end of his exhortations, the theology of the body, he basically says, there's a lot more we could do with this. And so that has always fascinated me, is that kind of open invitation that he left the church to continue to explore this as new questions and problems and issues arise.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, there's so much goodness there.
There's so much in JP2.
I know. There really is. There really truly is. And yeah, it's just so good. And I, again, just love how you're bringing to light that the church is literally saying, like, there's nothing wrong with a woman's fertility, right? Like that God created our physiology so well, and it's so important to understand the physiology because that's going to trickle down into everything else. And again, I just love that. And I think it's also so important that we say too, and I know you mentioned this, how important it is not just for women to know this information, but for men to also know this information. Not necessarily that they have to know like exactly what Humana Vitae and what like all of these encyclicals that he's written says, but just to or even understand, like they don't even have to understand everything about a woman's cycle, but just to understand like how to support a woman, how to support his wife during her cycle, during a pregnancy, during a birth, because I've worked with so many women who they really desire to birth in a certain space or in a certain situation, and their husbands are like not on board with it at all, which I understand to some extent. But whenever we go through and we like talk about, does he actually understand the physiology of what's happening in birth? They're always like, no, that he has no clue. And it's like, that's so important that he does understand that, because if he doesn't get that, like, you're not going to feel safe in a certain place or position or whatever, then your body's not going to work well, right? Like your body's not going to allow your baby to come out because it doesn't feel safe. And that's just a physiological response. And so again, I think it's so important that men, again, at least to some degree, that they understand this information and that they really seek to continue to learn more about women, even if they're not married, because again, we're all connected and it all matters. So it's so good. Okay.
I think too, for our priests, I mean,
yes.
You may have seen it with your clients as well, but like we need to be giving pastoral advice, and we need to be able to shepherd people in a way that is actually in accordance with science and with nature. Right. And so unfortunately, you know, I've known priests who are just ignorant about what natural family planning is, how it actually works, you know, depending on kind of, I hate to say it, but like kind of what side of the aisle they want to fall on with NFP and their own personal stance towards it. I do think there's a lot of it misinformation. And so we as a church really need to foster an environment where we do understand the implications and the practicalities of what we may be asking couples to do within their marriage, so that we can support them properly. Yes.
Yeah. And that's such a good point, because we attend a Latin Mass parish, and it's amazing and beautiful, but some of the families there don't agree with the use of NFP. And I've talked to a lot of women who might have like 9, 10, 11, 12 kids, and they're just like drowning. And so I bring this up because they feel like they can't use this because it's like that whatever priest or whomever that they've talked to before says that this isn't something that they can use. But when they can see that like they're not actually being the mother that God is calling them to be, because they're so exhausted and they're physically just like not able to show up for their children and their families, that like this actually could be a gift to maybe say, my mental health is not in a good place right now. Let's maybe wait this month and see what God's calling us to do in the next month. And I think, again, I just wanted to bring that up because I know a lot of listeners somewhat struggle with the NFP and like, is it listed or not? And again, I just wanted to make sure that you understand that there is a time and a space for it. And it is so beautiful, and it still just brings about conversations, and it's still hard no matter what you choose to do. And so, I just wanted to make sure that we share that part of it too. So.
Yeah. And I also think it's important even for people who never feel called to use natural family planning. I mean, if that's what you discern, good for you. Like, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. But I do still think that there is really important information that I think, unfortunately, in the church is usually reserved for those pre-Cana formation sessions where we talk about NFP just exclusively in the context of proximate prep for marriage, but we don't necessarily continue with ongoing support after that. And we also aren't giving women, even from the earliest teenage years, the really important information that they need about their bodies in order to navigate some of those more difficult teenage years. I mean, I know women who have wanted to use NFP to try to conceive because they have fertility issues, but unfortunately, because of what happened in their teenage years and they didn't know anymore about their menstrual cycles, you know, they had endometriosis that went unchecked for a really long time, and they ended up being infertile. And so these are the sorts of things that I think as a church It's so wonderful that we have this information to be able to gift to people. And there are age appropriate and situation appropriate ways that we can give this information that is needed for women at various stages of their lives without assuming that everything is going to be about postponing pregnancy. I think that that's a very, very narrow understanding of what NFP would be for. And if we think about it more in the context of just whole appreciation of women's bodies, then that conversation becomes a lot bigger.
Yes. No, I love that. So let's touch on that, because that is something that I sort of fumble in my mouth sometimes whenever I'm like, oh, Billings is such a great method, no matter for who it is, whether it's like your child or not. And I say this after I just gave a whole education on like how to postpone or achieve a pregnancy. And I'm like, wait, that's probably confusing for the woman hearing that. Yes. But like, you know what I mean? So yeah, let's touch on that. So how can these methods, or how can the language of your body help those who might not necessarily be in a space where childbearing is either in their season right now, or maybe God's called them to a different vocation? So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. So the way that I think about it is I think about like natural family planning is an application of a certain type of knowledge, right? Natural family planning is what you choose to do with a certain knowledge set. With that same knowledge set, you could do a lot of different things. And primarily we'd be thinking about just monitoring women's health. And so when I back it up, right? So my business has a very concrete sort of system that we use for divvying up the different stages of body literacy. And the first one we just call cycle awareness. And that's what we do in our cycle prep, our first period program. And cycle awareness is all about just coming to the appreciation of like what a menstrual cycle is and how a menstrual cycle may impact things like our energy and our moods, how we can care for our bodies during this time, and just making it this sort of awareness of what happens to our bodies as we're growing up, and something that we can be curious and we can pay attention to and sensitive to as we grow. And then we can extend that knowledge to cycle charting, right? That's where we could learn how to observe the signs that our body's giving us. For a lot of girls, it's easiest to just start with simple cervical fluid signs, right? Just to start noticing patterns, not even necessarily to look for ovulation yet, because in the first few years, that's going to be irregular, right? But then once their cycles do get regular, to be able to identify ovulation as a healthy sign and to understand what are the health things that you can glean from cycle charting, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Then we can move on from there, and we can then ask the deeper questions about like, okay, well, what can cycle charting tell me about who I am, right? How can I integrate this into my sense of my identity and myself as a daughter of God and in my relationships? And that's where I really would hope that every woman has a basic understanding. Like if you are, not that everybody needs to be charting their cycles, but if you are aware of it and at least have some basic knowledge as to how to do it, you can choose whether it's something that would be pertinent to you in your particular state of life and situation. And so I would hope that even religious sisters are given the option to kind of have this like charting application and integration of identity opportunity, because they're not immune from women's reproductive health issues any more than the rest of us. I recently just gave a perimenopause presentation to a group of sisters, and we were talking all about like charting our migraines with these changes and like how to talk to your doctor about cyclical progesterone instead of continuous progesterone. And, you know, all these sorts of conversations that we would navigate with the doctor, but having the cycle knowledge really allows us to articulate what we want to have happen and the sorts of ways that we can help our body through some of these transitions or help our body through a medical diagnosis in a way that honors our natural rhythms as best we can.
Yeah, I love that, because I remember, I'm just thinking personally, thinking back to whenever I first was cycling, and I was like so confused. I'm like, is this normal? Like, what's going on? It was just, it was just so confusing, because like certain books wouldn't tell you anything. And at the time there wasn't really Google. I mean, there was, but like not really. And so it really was like, you were just like on your own. And so I love that now there's these resources like yours that we can really use to help educate, honestly, a lot of moms who don't necessarily know this information, but then also their children too, right? Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So is there anything else in the language of your body that you feel like is like so important for everybody to know, whether they are moms, dads, children, anything like that?
That's an excellent question. What would be like one nugget that I would want people to walk away from? I mean, I think I'll just reiterate something that I've already said, which is that I think that this information, regardless of if you ever use natural family or planning or not, I think that this information is important for us to at least offer to our girls and to at least offer to our young men who, regardless of whatever their vocational path may be, will be interacting with women, right? I want to make sure that our church is a space where this is honored as a beautiful and good natural biological function and not something to be shamed and not something to be a source of embarrassment for women. I think that narrative is long overdue to be squashed. And I think it does still persist in some segments of the culture. Yes. And I don't think our church is immune to that. And so I think that anything that we can do is, even when cycles are hard, and I want to just acknowledge this point, that cycles and periods can be really, really tough for them. If we are equipped and empowered to articulate that, then even when our cycles are hard, right, we can still see the goodness of God's design in all of that. And we can also feel the love and the support and the help that we get from other people who are trying to help us carry those crosses when they do come up.
Yes. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And there is very much still a stigma about everything, unfortunately. I actually have quite a few clients who I work with who are on the other side of the world. So in like Croatia, Nigeria, like those different places. And my goodness, it's even more stigmatized there. Again, I work primarily in the birth space. So like, especially in the birth space, there's a lot of misunderstanding. But then just from a basic cycle perspective, there's a lot with that as well. So yeah, I think it's so important for us to really keep that in mind, that this is normal, that this is how God made us. And that sometimes it is abnormal. Things do happen. But thankfully, we have resources like yours. We have NAPRO technology. We have all of these beautiful things that we can do to really help to optimize health. Because again, our cycles really are that fifth vital sign. And that's so important for us to recognize that. So important for us. Okay, cool. Is there anything in terms of like your courses that you offer that you really want moms to know, especially for their children? I would love to hear more about, like that, your cycle charting for girls or any of the courses that you have, because there's a lot of secular courses out there for girls to learn their cycle, but there's not a lot of even Christian-based ones, and there's definitely not a lot of Catholic ones. So I'd love to know why is it so important for girls to take this, especially from a Catholic perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll back up even before charting. My kind of hallmark course is called Cycle Prep. It's a first period course for girls. And it was designed to be a first period course that basically we never got. So moms, if you're sitting there thinking, man, my puberty education was really awful. I've just chatted with a lot of moms who feel ill-equipped to be able to describe what's going on in your body in a way that feels age appropriate, that feels like it's building a relationship with your daughter instead of scaring her or like not giving her too much information. So Cycle Prep really is designed to be a course that is for girls age 9 to 11 and their moms or their parents to do together so that you can learn right alongside with her. You learn about the 4 key hormones in the cycle. We learn how to tell the story of the menstrual cycle. We talk about different product options. And then we talk about building a culture of care, about learning to listen to our body as we go through these different phases of our cycles and how we can extend that care to our friends as we're all growing up and going through this together. So it's a very gentle, but very kind of information dense way to get this to your daughter in an age appropriate way. And then from there, we have cycle charting for girls, which I call a values-based approach to observing your cycle. And what I mean by values-based is that it's not overtly Christian in the sense that we're going to be like, we're going to pray a psalm with each of our bleeding days. Like, what 12-year-old is really going to love that, right? This is a book that instills value in the goodness of your body, instills value in learning to listen to your body, instills values of health, right? And advocating for yourself with the doctor, and getting to understand how this is such an important part of just who we are made to be, right? And to equip the girls to really navigate this time of change with a sense of positivity and real understanding of why their cycles are different. And moms, if you are listening, I just really want to tell you there's so much anxiety that I hear from moms about like, my daughter's cycle is irregular or this or that is going on. And we don't have the information for the most part. We didn't receive that information to understand like why that can be totally healthy and normal at different stages. And when exactly that crosses the line, and we do need to talk to the doctor. And so having that even basic information for yourself is like, here's the line in the sand, right? Here are the diagnostic criteria to be able to look at and to understand my daughter's cycles and to talk to her about this can be such a relief. So I'm just going to tell you, moms, like this is all designed to help you as well and to help open up those conversations with you and your daughter as she goes through this with an eye towards helping all of us to better appreciate this design of our bodies, even when things can be tricky and difficult.
Yes, I love that so much. Yeah, so good. My daughter's 9 and we're pretty candid about talking about things, but I'll definitely have to check it out because as always, learning from somebody else is different than learning from mom.
And I wanted to make sure that moms had an option. Like if you want to just watch the cycle prep videos for yourself to get an idea of like how you would want to talk to your daughter, great. Like you don't have to sit down and do it with her. But I also want to give moms that option to know that like I am there to support your voice as a primary educator. Like hopefully everything that I would say in cycle prep is stuff that you have already told your daughter. And so she's just going to hear it from somebody who's a professional, who's an expert, and she's going to, open up some conversations with you that way and just kind of amplify your voice as a primary educator is really the goal of that.
I love that you mentioned that parents are the primary educator because again, that is so important in this. Please don't rely on schools or anybody else to educate your children on this because again, first off, it's such a personal thing. And like how, at least I'm thinking from my own experience, how like impersonal and almost like scary to some extent to be learning this from like the school nurse that you've talked to approximately 3 times. And those 3 times were heard for just to take your height and weight. And it's like, you're afraid to ask questions. You like are afraid that if you say something that like maybe she'll tell somebody else or like it's embarrassing to ask in front of other people. So again, I really appreciate that you said that because it's so, so important. And again, even if you're a mom who's uncomfortable with this, like maybe that's a sign from God that maybe you need to like lean into it yourself a little bit more. Remember, like if we are uncomfortable with things, then those are invitations from God to, again, kind of like do some work on ourselves. And what a blessing that is. All right. Well, as we wrap up, where can people find you, your books, your courses? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I've tried to keep everything simple. So my business name is Pearl and Thistle. And so you'll find me at pearlandthistle, all spelled out.com. And then on Instagram and Facebook at that same handle, Pearl and Thistle.
Okay, perfect. Yes, definitely check her out. She has so many different courses and books and just great things, great resources for parents with little girls. And I'm sure even boys are going to learn so much from this as well. All right. And so I always ask the last question is, what do you want the discerning mother to know?
I think that's a great question. And I've been mulling that over this whole time. And I think I want to just go back to something that I maybe already have said and just kind of end with that. The goodness of your body does not have to do with the function of your body. How well or how poorly your body functions does not make it more or less good. Yes, the goodness of your body comes from God's loving design for you and the image of God that you uniquely bear. I was having this conversation with another woman recently, and we just paused to really reflect on that so much of our society tries to talk to us about, like, what are we producing? How are we working? How are we showing up in the world? And God does not judge your goodness by any of those things, right? You just are. You are loved and you are good. And so even when things are difficult with our bodies, which they will inevitably be, right? We can rest knowing that God intimately cares for us and hears us in that suffering and desires to be with us, regardless of how we feel our body is functioning at any given time.
Yes, that's so good. You need to just preach about that all the time.
Preach.
Somebody can preach that. That's so good. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Christina. It was such a blessing to be able to hear from you, and definitely check out all of her books and resources. So much good knowledge, so much good information. Whether, again, you're already a professional at cycle tracking or not, like you can always learn something. You can always learn something different. You can always learn a different way to say things that might make sense to somebody else in a different way. So like, definitely check it out, especially if you have little girls or if you work with little girls or even boys again, like definitely check out all her resources. They're so, so good. So thank you again so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brigid.